shed some light about experiences that are rarely spoken about. So whether you're living it, supporting someone who is going through it, or just want to learn more, we're talking about it today. This is part 1 of our talk. We'll tell you how to get involved with part 2 soon enough. So, I'm happy to introduce, let me get her a second mic, but I'm happy to introduce Brooke.
Hello everyone, delighted to be here today with you on stage. Thank you so much, Dwania.
All right, we're gonna dive right in. So, we want to start at the very beginning. Because we're talking about medically induced menopause, I want a quick show of hands. How many of you know what that is? Okay,
Lots of you, excellent.
all right. And how many of you have either experienced it or you know someone who's gone through it? That's quite a bit. So you're in the right place. We're going to start talking about it. So Brooke, she's an executive coach. She's a breast cancer survivor. Her experience has really shaped her approach to authentic leadership, emotional resilience, and strategic reinvention. Now we're going to start at the beginning, like I said before, and we're going to start sharing some stories about what it was really like when you realized you were entering menopause suddenly.
So mine was a really interesting approach to this. I didn't know. So my oncologist actually didn't have a conversation with me about menopause because very typically breast cancer is for women who've been there, done that, as they mentioned earlier in one of the talks. And so it's not something that comes up very often. And so when I stopped getting my period, I thought, oh, okay, well, I've heard that women who undergo trauma or have a sudden strain on the body can stop getting their period. And so that's what I thought had happened. I had no idea that I was going into menopause. And it wasn't until I started getting bladder infections and got referred back to my family doctor, and she was like, oh, I think we need to have a different conversation. And so it was my family doctor, and it was the UTIs that tipped us off.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So having to go through having a UTI to realize that you're in menopause, and Brooke, we have very different stories because we're going through our experiences with a time lapse. You're more recent, I'm about 5 years out. For me, I can share that the moment I realized I was going through menopause, I was sitting in my oncologist's office grabbing the fat around my belly that I somehow grew in 3 months. No, not 3 months, 3 weeks. And I looked at him and I was like, what is this? And he's like, oh, well, yeah, that's what happens. And I'm like, could someone give me a heads up? Because I knew nothing. And I mean, you learn about puberty in school, but you don't learn anything about menopause. So this was really mind-blowing to me. To have to sit in front of someone and ask them what I'm going through and not being told what it was. So from belly fat holding to UTIs, I don't know what else we have to go through to get the alarm rung that we're going through menopause.
So one of the things for me that was also really different, because I know we're going to talk a little bit about symptoms that were a bit unexpected, I would get hot. Now, keep in mind, I didn't know I was in menopause, so I didn't know that I was having hot flashes. But what I actually thought, in my interpretation at the time, was I am doing too much. This is my nervous system telling me that I'm doing too much because I'm sweating. And what happens when I'm nervous? What happens when I'm like out physically exerting myself? I would get hot. So that's what I thought was happening. And I was like, okay, I need to go have a nap. I need to stop what I'm doing and I need to have a nap. And that's what I would do. And then of course it would settle down and I'd be fine for a little while and then I'd go and try and do something and it would start over again. I was like, well, this is frustrating, but I'm in therapy. At the time I was in chemotherapy and I was like, okay, this is too much. I need to slow down. And it was, I'll say it 10 months later, and we'll get into that, when I had mentioned it to my physiotherapist, and I said, I keep getting hot. And she's like, oh, those are just hot flashes. And I was like, what do you mean? Because at this point I still didn't know I was in menopause. I'm like, what do you mean I'm getting hot flashes? But it was also so interesting to hear someone who works with breast cancer patients say it in such a dismissive way. Those are just hot flashes. And so I have to say, here today, listening to Dr. Shifina, is it Premji? I think was her last name. And she was talking about all the stress management techniques, and that was really reaffirming for me to know that it is this idea of slowing down, this idea of this almost your nervous system sending out signals that it's too much. That really resonated with me listening to her today, because that was exactly my experience.
So with the experience and with the symptoms, and I know Andrea just spoke about some of the symptoms, can we talk about some of the symptoms that really caught you off guard? I know for me, I started getting vertigo. I would be so dizzy and I wouldn't know why. Like, there were some days where the room was spinning so much I couldn't get out of bed or I was starting to throw up. And I kept asking my doctor, and they were like, well, maybe you need to go see an ENT. No one ever told me this was possibly a symptom, and it made my life easier to know, right? Brooke, what were some of your symptoms that were, I mean, I know you are remarkable on the symptom train, but share.
So Dwania says that because throughout my whole journey, when you end up in going through treatment where they are inducing you into hormones, or sorry, where you're in chemotherapy and on hormone therapy, and they're inducing you into menopause, you get booklets, you get a lot of paper, you get a lot of paper and a lot of pamphlets. And when they did, there's sort of like, here's what's typical and you can expect, and then you get the here's what's less typical, and then at the very back in small print are the here are the rare side effects that nobody gets. And I keep ending up in that list. So that's, my goal for this whole experience as I go forward is I just want to be medically unremarkable. But I have to say, it was, some of the things that were really troubling is I didn't fully realize how many of the symptoms, like I did similarly dismissed a lot of them because I was undergoing so much else. And so I really made that misconnection. And it wasn't until we started talking about the next phase of my treatment, which for me is an anti-estrogen drug. So this is, I know you're going to talk a little bit about your experience. I'm now on an anti-estrogen. And so to sort of describe, it's almost like they put you in the deep end and held your head underwater. There's none of this perimenopause gradualness. I knew I'd been in perimenopause because I would get eczema, like an itchiness on the inside of my knees. That's where it was. That was when I had thought I was in perimenopause. And then it was when my doctor said, okay, well, we need to start you. We need to figure out which drug to put you on. When was your last period? And I said, oh, it was 11 months ago. And she said, oh, okay, well, I'm seeing you again in 3 weeks, so why don't we just put a pause on this conversation? I'll talk to you in 3 weeks, because then you'll be a week away from menopause. And I went, what? And that's how I found out. She's like, yeah, you'll have been 12 months without your period. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm going through menopause? So yeah, sort of caught off guard on a couple different sides.
It's like we're going through a different phase of, being a teenager again. Breaking out. Some of us went through that. We also, I know personally, numbing feelings. The brain fog is intense. There's some days I really don't think I remember the alphabet. And I still remember the first time I sat in an office with my boss and I told him I felt inadequate. That is not a word I use to describe myself. I am fan-freaking-tastic. I am an overachiever. So to look at someone and tell them that I felt inadequate, I also cried. Luckily, he's a wonderful soul and he just understands. But these are conversations you're not only going to have with your family, but you're going to have them with people who might have to experience all of the emotions that we're going through on a day-to-day basis. It might be your colleague at work. It might be your boss. It might be some random person who you might be swapping a project with, and you might lose it one day, but they need to understand where it came from, right? Think about the symptoms a little bit more, but we touched a little bit on the emotional side. We're going to touch on the mental side as well. Let's talk about how, as women, how is this transition transition impacting how we view ourselves?
I'm not gonna lie, I think I'm still processing that. I always thought, so I'm blessed. My mom is still with me, and so I was able to have a chat with her. And what kind of symptoms did you go through, and when did they start? And my aunt has had some honest conversations with me as well. And it sounds like my aunt had some more severe symptoms, and some of the ones that I've experienced that we're going to get into. But I found it's more the label. I've never seen myself as a postmenopausal woman at my age. I thought that was 10, maybe 15 years from now. I did not think it was now. And so that's something I'm still working on. But I'd say that was probably the biggest piece. It's sort of the shock of it all, of going through it, yes, but also the shock of now having that label of myself that I wasn't prepared for, and I really am not sure what I think of. That being said, it's now been over a year since I've had a period, and that part's really lovely.
We have to be thankful for all those blessings, right? Being in a space like this will teach all of us to normalize all of the things that we're going through. I've learned to accept where I am every day on that day. Because if I don't, I will beat myself up. Because I will start feeling inadequate, and I never want to feel that way. There are days when the best I can give is 20%, and I'm okay with that. Because my 100% today is 20. I'm giving you my best. So for the emotional and the mental component, whatever it is I'm going through on that day, I'm accepting it for what it is, and I'm living in the moment, and I'll be ready to move on. Because it's going to be more stressful if you don't, right? It's going to be way more stressful. I know we're coming down to some, okay, I got more time. All right. Okay, we talked about the fact that we're on different timelines, at least we mentioned it. You're fresh. I'm a little bit more seasoned on this side, going through it for a little bit. How have you had to advocate for yourself, and what do you wish doctors and women knew about this process?
Okay, the advocacy piece is huge for me. And I think one of the reasons why, once I became aware, now my doctor knows that I am a self-advocate. In fact, I'll often ask her, I'll end with our sessions, is there anything I haven't asked you? Is there any other support that I need for myself that I didn't know to ask about? And she always is like, you know how to advocate yourself, you're doing all the right things, everything's fine. So that part's been helpful. I think the piece that was a real shock for me is when you go through chemically induced menopause, there's a lot of sudden change. And for me, sexual change was probably the one that hit the hardest. Because I'd come through chemotherapy, I thought I was okay. I was really looking forward to having some fun again and having the energy to do that. And the pain was unreal. It felt like someone was ripping me open, and I was like, what is this awfulness? So I was bold and I was brave, and I went back and I asked my doctor and my nurse, what is going on? And the answer that I got was, oh, I've heard that some women use coconut oil. And I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, well, that wasn't helpful. So I went back to my family doctor, and she said, okay, well, there is Reptine that you can use, which is an insert. And I found it really uncomfortable. It was just the shape, the size. Talk about no sleep. Not on that list of symptoms is vaginal moisturizers that irritate you. But the other thing that I found is, luckily I had you as my guide, because you'd gone through this before me. And so I called and asked you, and you had some recommendations for me for sort of this dry feeling. It was just uncomfortable during the day. Forget having sex, it was just uncomfortable all the time. And so I was really grateful in my community. There's fabulous products out there. Pleasure Pods is here. I forget which booth number, but they're about 2 miles over. And so there are other products out there that are extremely good for you. They're useful, and they're much easier to use. And easier from an outcome perspective as well. And so I think that was one of the things. I was brave and bold, and I just boldly asked. But there's a lot of people where questions like that, even asking, hearing the answers can be embarrassing. And so it's really finding the courage in yourself to ask.
That is so true because, from 2 points. One, whenever my oncologist decided there was no conversation about sexual health, or they would recommend things for me to use that were irritants, so it really did make me feel like my vagina was being ripped out. Shout out to This Is Perimenopause podcast folks over there. Listen to that episode. It's worth the listen. Because I was searching for any kind of resolve. And I had to go to a different doctor and run a few more tests, and then they gave me that same coconut oil that was more of a mess than it was any kind of help. And then I too ran into someone at this show last year, and they're over there too. It's Iris, and they have been very helpful. But I am going to re-up because I feel like a normal human now. I don't have to worry about the fact that I literally was feeling like someone's just ripping me apart, right? And this is something I'm very thankful that I could be the person that can answer your question, because again, a lot of people don't feel too comfortable talking about that. I'm an open book, so if any of you have questions, please feel free to ask. But yes, asking your doctor for help and still asking those specific questions, sometimes they just don't have the answers, or they're afraid to recommend things that are not on their list that is approved for them to recommend to you. It is up to us to go and shop around. You're in the right place to shop around, FYI.
Okay, hold on. I got one funny one for you.
ahead.
My other girlfriend,
Good morning.
do you know what? My other girlfriend gave me the best advice. She's like, listen, sweetheart, it's like the Sahara Desert. Coconut oil did nothing for me, but olive oil was our saving grace. So, friends can come in with some fabulous advice too.
Okay, so I said this is part 1. We're going to tell you how to get through part 2 because we want to have a longer time to talk, really talk and dive in. And we will have a guest, another guest in our part 2 segment. But as we wrap up, Brooke, a piece of advice that you can share with someone going through this immediate change right now.
Journal. And I say that because there's a lot that comes out of this. That's what carried me through, was taking time to be with myself every day and the thoughts that I had. So every day I would start my morning and I would write things down. And in doing so, I found it really helpful to also capture my symptoms, capture my mental health. A lot of stuff that was in my head was coming into words. So journaling.
For me, my piece of advice to everyone is to ask for exactly what you want. Ask specific questions. Even if you think the person next to you might not have the answer, they might know someone who does. Do not be afraid, because this is not something that we should continue to hide. It's a part of our lives. And the only way we're going to find solution is to continue to speak up. So we're not just speaking up in these 4 walls here. We're speaking up outside. Ask everyone and tell everyone what you're going through, because that allows them to be more sympathetic, right? So I got the finish now tag. Ladies and gents, thank you so much. I have a lot of thanks. First, thank you, Brooke, for being here. Thank all of you. Pat yourselves on the back for taking the time out today to be here, because this is very important. Thankful to the Menopause Show for allowing us to share this story. This is day 1. I hope I see you all here on day 2. I'll be back as your host of the Revive and Thrive stage. And in order to find out more about our second part of our conversation, there's a QR code over on the desk to my right, your left. Please scan it and join the waiting list, and we will let you know when you can join the virtual conversation to talk a little bit more about symptoms, and that menopause is not just about hot flashes. So again, I'm your host, Dwania. Thank you so much for joining me.